Hey there! You're listening to Amplify Your Legacy. This podcast is packed with insights and strategies to turn your passion into something that endures for generations. So get comfortable, stay inspired, and let's jump into today's episode with your host, Sallana Brown.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Amplify Your Legacy. I'm Sallana Brown, and this episode is brought to you by Home Club Capital, your nationwide private funding partner for your real estate investments. Learn more at homeclubcapital.com. Today's guest is someone who truly understands the power of being heard in today's crowded marketplace. In 2015, Trevor Oldham founded Podcasting U, a company that helps alternative investment companies build brand awareness and attract more investors through the power of podcast guesting. Fast forward to today, they've helped over 400 companies land more than 6,500 interviews. Trevor is also into real estate. He's into multifamily, self-storage, and mortgage notes. So whether you're a real estate pro, a brand builder, or just legacy minded, this show is definitely for you. Trevor, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Let's get started. You're doing a lot right now, balancing podcasting, brand building, and expanding your real estate portfolio. What does your day-to-day look like? What are you focused on?
Primarily what I do today is I do a combination of two things. So I work with a lot of clients to go out there and get them booked as guests on other people's podcasts. And it could be for any number of reasons. Our primary client that we work with is real estate investors. So they could be building brand awareness. They maybe are raising capital for the next deal. Maybe they just want to go on podcasts because it's a cool thing to do. And then conversely, we work with podcast hosts that need help securing guests for their shows for them to interview. So we do that as well. But it's definitely been a great space. Back in 2015, when I started my own podcast, people were like, that's kind of strange. Where now I think it's a little bit more normal for people to have a podcast. So it's definitely the industry has definitely changed quite a bit over the last 10 years or so.
I see your plate is really full, and yet you're clearly intentional about every move that you're making. Let's dig into how it all got started. How did you get into real estate? And what sparked that interest?
So it was actually through my podcasting business. So I've been working with primarily investors for probably the last 5 years or so. And it was funny. I was talking to my business coach one day, and I was like, I want to invest in real estate. He's like, well, why don't you just invest through your clients? And it's sort of like that light bulb moment went off. Like, wow, I don't know why I've never thought of that. I've talked to these people all the time. So that's sort of how it got started. And then conversely, it was realizing that, I enjoy running my company, but I don't know if I want to be running it for another 40 years. So if I'm taking my money and I'm investing it and I'm putting it into a 401k or an IRA, obviously I can't touch that till I'm about 60 years old. So I want to be able to access my money earlier and then be able to take that money and make more money on it. And that's sort of where real estate came in. So I ended up becoming a passive investor right now. So I'm in 4 different deals, looking to get into my 5th deal. I was going back and forth whether or not I wanted to be an active investor, where I go out, I purchase the property myself and I manage it, or I want to be a passive investor where I write someone a check for 25 or 50K and then they manage the deal. Yes, I probably don't make as much, but I also don't have to deal with as many headaches of being a landlord. So there's each of those, there's ups and downs to being a passive investor versus active investor, but I like being on the passive side, just fits my personality better. So in 4 deals right now across a couple of different asset classes and looking to get into another asset class just to diversify. But it's been great. The cash flow has been great, monthly distributions, no capital calls, which is always a nice thing to have in this environment. I know a lot of sponsors have had capital calls, so nothing like that. So it's just been a great investment, especially when the way I split my portfolio now is 50% stock market, 50% real estate, where I still think there's a time and place to put money in the stock market, but it is nice where my portfolio where, the market's gone down quite a bit over the last little while with everything that's going on. Well, I'm like, well, at least not 100% of my money is tied up into it. It's 50% in it. And then the other 50% is, pretty much has no correlation to do with the stock market. So I like that aspect of it where it just allows me to get that diversification.
I really love hearing the early steps that led to something bigger. It's wild how one decision can snowball into something bigger. Let's zoom back in a little bit. So many investors are trying to raise capital, especially from accredited investors. From your experience, how can podcasts help with that? What do people get wrong when they think about podcast guesting for raising money?
That's a great question. So I find that podcasting is sort of the top of funnel strategy. So really podcasts are a great way to build brand awareness for someone to get to know about you. I find that, and you can imagine a lot of these deals, typically on average, the minimum is going to be $50,000 to invest in this deal. The first time someone hears about you on a podcast, maybe they're not ready to invest that 50,000 with you, but maybe from that podcast, they sign up on your email list. They see the deals that you have coming through. Maybe eventually they book a call with your company and then, walk through the investments they have offerings. So I find that people think that they're going to go on podcasts and raise, millions of dollars. Well, yes, you can do that, but you also have the other infrastructure built up on your back end, marketing system. Like, how does your website look? Do you have like lead capture forms? Just different things like that, where again, podcasts are great for building that brand awareness, driving traffic to your site, but it's not just like the only marketing strategy. Like, I could get a client placed on, say, the best real estate podcast, that has 200,000 listeners as an example. But if they don't have like a website that's great, then people are going to go to it and just leave, or that type of thing that I think really people get wrong. And then you have to be consistent too. People think, okay, I'm going to go on one podcast, two podcasts. It's really part of an ongoing strategy where you want to be consistently doing like 2 to 4 podcasts a month, just to continually build on it, continually to build that evergreen content. But yeah, I find the number one, I think that's a good aspect, is one, expecting to have success right away and raising all this money, and then two, I would say just going on the wrong types of podcasts per se. So and it's easy to tell. You could look at a podcast, and if it's talking about how to invest in your first real estate deal, and I'm just talking more of your active deal, or it's a house hacking podcast. Maybe that's not going to make sense for if you're someone that's raising capital. So who are typically people that are raising capital or who are investing in these deals? And you could think of your high income W-2 professionals. So you could think of your doctors, your lawyers, your dentists, different folks like that. And then just trying to find shows within that space that make sense. And I say it with a grain of salt, because if there's a podcast for doctors and they're only talking to other doctors on the show, where you're not going to be a fit for that show. You have to look, are they bringing on other investing people, other real estate people, maybe other asset classes outside of real estate? Doesn't make sense. So there's just having to do that due diligence as well when you're looking to place yourself on these shows.
You book thousands of podcast interviews, right? What are some ways guesting actually create real value for the clients or business owners?
So I would say, building that brand awareness. So there's folks that are very successful that no one really knows about them. And then all of a sudden they start to go on all these other podcasts, and then more people start to reach out to them. I find that on the other side is a lot of our clients will take the interviews that they do that are over, more often than not, are going to be done over video. So they could take a 30-minute video or 30-minute interview, and they can create 6 to 10 social media clips. So it's very helpful when it comes to creating social media content. And then I find there's a nice SEO aspect of it. And not to get too technical, but a lot of the time podcast hosts will write a recap of your episode and they'll link back to your website. Well, the more links back to your website, the better Google is going to look at your website. And the better Google looks at your website, the higher you're going to rank on Google. And basically what this looks like is you being on the first page of Google versus you being on the 5th page of Google. I know for me, when I search something on Google, I'm typically not going to the 5th page. Maybe I'll venture over to the 2nd page. Do I even make it down past the bottom half of the first page? So that you just have to think of it in that scenario. I find that you get better at speaking, which is obviously important I found that for me, the more podcasts that I went on, the better I got at sales calls with potential clients because I was talking about real estate all the time and it just made it easier. So I find that it really allows you to polish your story so that when you are, talking to a potential investor, you've rehearsed your story, and just talked about it so many different times. You know what you're gonna say. It doesn't come off as uncomfortable. There's not too many ums or ahs or just different things like that. But yeah, there's so many tangible benefits to going out there and being a guest. Honestly, I find what I really like about being a guest on podcasts is just honestly the networking aspect of it, where we're spending 30 minutes of our time together and we really get to have a deep conversation where if I like reached out to you and be like, hey, can I pick your brain for 30 minutes? Yeah, that seems like a big chunk of time. But if I'm reaching out and saying, hey, can I interview you or can I be a guest in your podcast and whatnot, I find that just seems to work out a little bit better. And there's just that really strong networking play. And you really just never know who you're going to meet, whether you're a guest or whether you're a host.
So let's talk lead generation. How do you ensure your leads don't dry up, whether for podcasting you or for real estate ventures?
That's a great question. And I find that just being consistent, that's really the biggest thing where people sometimes think that I'm going to go on a podcast sort of blitz tour where I'm going to go do 20 interviews in 1 month, as an example. So you go out, you do your 20 interviews in a month, sporadically, say over the next, let's say 4 to 12 weeks. So over the next 3 months or so, those episodes are going out. You're probably going to see a spike of leads coming through, of traffic, of volume. And then at the end of those 3 months, maybe you'll pick up the occasional lead coming through, but that's sort of pretty much the end of it. And then you have to hop on and then you have to do another sort of, what I call a blitz tour, going out and doing 20 more interviews. I find that just being very consistent. And that's where I go back to my recommendation of going on about doing 2 to 4 podcast interviews a month, where you're doing one a week to one every other week. That really works best for me and my schedule because there's a lot that goes into a podcast. And I find that if I try to do like 5 interviews a week, it's just too much for me personally. I'd rather just be very focused on one interview a week and give that interview everything I have instead of just doing so many in a particular day. So I find, again, just being consistent with that, because some interviews you do, it's going to generate no leads. Some podcasts you do, it's going to generate leads. And it's hard to tell exactly which podcast. And just speaking from a client experience, we place one client on a podcast and then they get 20 investor calls, and we place the same client, maybe a little bit different of an asset class. Maybe they're in self-storage instead of multifamily, and no one's reaching out to them. So, but you really never know until you go on the show, and you can never say for certain, okay, if I go on this podcast, I'm going to generate X amount of leads, which is why it's just, again, going back to that consistency, because you really don't know which podcast is your story going to align with, which audience is going to really like what you have to say. And again, it just goes back to being consistent. And then over time, you start to build this funnel, and then you're getting episodes released pretty much on a weekly basis, the more interviews that you do. And then now you're starting to generate those leads consistently coming in. So I find, again, just going back to that consistency of doing 2 to 4 interviews a month, so those leads never dry up.
Those are great strategies. And you have a great system that really makes a difference. It's great advice. Speaking of systems, how do you actually track your podcast guesting performance? Any ways to watch that closely?
That's a great question. So what I like to do is use Google, just make it simple. I use a Google spreadsheet, and I'll write the name of the show. I'll write down the day that I had the interview on. So let's say it's April or May. So I'll write down whatever day that the interview is on, and then reach out to the host. Hey, do you have an idea of when this interview is going to go live? Whether they give me the exact day or they say it's going to be out sometime the end of June, as a hypothetical example. And then as we start to get closer in June, I'm going to reach back out to the host. Hey, do you have an exact day? And then I just go back through and I can see, okay, this interview is going live on, X day. When that day comes around, I can see, okay, did I generate more calls than usual? Maybe if I'm booking 2 sales calls a day just organically, now I'm at 7 calls booked today. Oh, I can track it back to this interview that I've done. So it's really just trying to track all that. And again, I try to make it simple for myself. I don't want to like overdo it. So I just use a Google spreadsheet, podcast name, date I recorded, date that the interview is going to go live. And then it's helpful in the sense that I'll be like, oh, I never received an email from this host. Oh, this interview actually did go live. Let me reach out to them to see if I can get a copy of the interview so that way I can take it and create social media posts for it. Because again, I spent 30 minutes of my time on the interview. I want to try to be able to use some of that content on my social media channel because I find that when I'm talking, it comes off much more organically on an interview than it does if I was just literally sitting at my computer, recording video after video. Maybe I'm using a script or whatnot. It just comes off a little bit better during an interview. So I'd rather use that type of video. But yeah, again, just using a good old fashioned Google spreadsheet. You could use an Excel file and just tracking in there because again, it's sometimes difficult to know exactly like where did this lead come from on this particular podcast. So I find that if I can at least get a good estimate of like, okay, this episode released today, and then now I got these booked calls, I can, theoretically, think that, okay, they came from this particular podcast because I didn't really change anything else on my marketing strategy other than, this podcast went live today.
Not everyone is meant to be a podcast guest, but that's okay. What are some signs someone isn't ready or shouldn't guest yet?
That's a great question. So I find if you're overly promotional, if you're just going on the podcast thinking, I'm just going to sell, 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 the audience can see right through that. I know when I'm a host, when I'm interviewing someone, I don't enjoy them if they're over salesy. I would imagine that the audience doesn't. So that's just one. So don't think that you're going on this podcast just to sell. So that's definitely one. Another aspect of it would be if you don't really have your story down and you're not sure what to talk about. Obviously, you can build this up over time, but maybe you're just a little bit, in a good way, inexperienced. Where if you're someone that's, depending on what you're doing, if you're just someone that just started off in real estate or just started off, say, your own business, maybe it's just a little too early for you to talk about. What I say is you want to have at least 5 talking points that you'd be able to share with a podcast host that you feel comfortable talking for. Not that you want to, but you could go on for 5 minutes talking about the points. Not that you want to go on for 5 minutes in a single interview. You want to make sure you go back and forth with the host. But once you start to get that down, you want to be someone that at least has a website or something that you're sending the traffic to when you're doing these interviews, because people listen to your interview, they go to your website, or they don't, they listen to your interview and then you don't have a website, then that just lost traffic and it doesn't really make sense to go on interviews if you don't have that. And then the last piece would just be like, if you don't think that you can be in like a nice quiet space to do your interviews. So for me, that's just, being in my office. More often than not, it's typically very quiet, but I have had interviews with people where they're outside trying to record an interview on their iPhone, or they're driving. And it's not going to make for a good interview. So just knowing like, if I'm going to be a guest, I have to set aside 30 minutes to an hour worth of my time, and I have to, turn off the notifications on my phone. I have to be in a quiet spot. I have to let, if there's anyone in the house, know, hey, I'm recording an interview. Just, unless it's an absolute emergency, you can come get me. But if it's not, just let me do the interview and, I can come help you out whenever it's done.
Let's flip the script. Should someone start their own podcast or focus on guesting first? What do you recommend for someone who wants results sooner?
That's another great question. And I find it's very time dependent. And what I mean by that is if you're a podcast host, it's going to take more time because you have to obviously record the interview. If you don't have a team, you have to edit the interview, maybe create some social media posts. So there's just more that goes into it. Where today, me as a guest, I show up for the interview, and then once we hop off, that's it. That's all I had to do. So there's benefits to both. I found that when I was first starting my business and I was first thinking about doing a podcast, it just made more sense because at the time it didn't make sense for me to go and be a guest on other people's podcasts. I just didn't have enough to share. I would rather start my own podcast. So I think first question is, or first thing you have to think about is what is your experience? So if you're someone that's newer, it makes more sense for you to start your own podcast. If you're someone that has, say, you don't have much time, but you're very experienced, then it makes sense for you to be a podcast guest. The best of both worlds is honestly when you're a host and you're a guest. But again, that goes back to, do you have the time and do you have the experience? I found for me, my time is pretty crunched. So it just didn't make sense for me to continue to be a podcast host. I'd rather be a podcast guest. I just felt as though I didn't have enough prep time to give to the guests that we had coming onto the show, and it wasn't fair to them. And that's what worked best for me over time. I'm hosting my own podcast right now, but I realized it's better for me if I don't have guests on the show, if it's just me doing a solo podcast and me talking for 30 or 35 minutes. So you just have to feel it out as you go. But long story short, I say if you're inexperienced, start your own podcast. If you're someone that is more experienced, it makes sense for you to go out there and be a guest on other people's podcasts. And then if you're experienced and somehow have a lot of time on your hand, then you can also start your own podcast and be a guest. Because you can imagine now your time is really being crunched. Because if you're, say, going on a couple interviews a week or a couple interviews a month, plus you're recording with the guest, you're it's gonna add up quickly and get you busy.
Okay, so when you prepare to be a guest, what's your personal prep process? Anything you always do before you hop on the mic?
So I find for me, when I'm hopping, on the podcast mic, so I make sure my phone is silenced. I make sure that I have water in the room. Just that's always a good thing to have. I think a lot of people forget that just in case I need a quick drink of water. And then I'll make sure that the morning of or the day before, I'll check out the podcast, see how long the episodes are. And I bring that because sometimes I've gone on a podcast, the episodes are 15 minutes. Other podcasts I've gone on, the episodes are an hour. Well, the responses that I'm going to give on a 15-minute podcast versus an hour podcast, they're probably going to be a little bit different. I probably have to be obviously shorter in my answers, where maybe I don't tell as many stories where I'm going on an hour-long podcast. So I check out the show, and then once I hop on to do the interview, I just check, make sure my mic's on, make sure that's working, make sure that if my webcam's working, make sure that's good and set up. And then if I'm the host, I always just make sure I hit that record button. That's always important. That's the biggest thing as a podcast host is making sure you hit it, because I have had that happen to me where I was a host, way back when. And this was back in 2015, 2016, and I had a very influential entrepreneur come on the podcast, and we get to the end of it, and I realized that I was no longer, I just never recorded the interview, and I never got the chance to interview him again, so missed out on that opportunity. So you just want to make sure that you record it. I usually would just keep a sticky note and like literally right on the mic, and then just peel it off and put it next to me once I have hit that record. But that way, I just never forgot it.
Now let's shift gears into something deeper. Would you share your perspective on legacy? How are you intentionally building your legacy right now?
I would say for the legacy aspect, it's really just building it for my daughter. She's very young, so she's obviously very small, but it's just building that legacy for her, trying to be the inspiration for her, just showing that here's how to run a business, here's how to build wealth, this is what it looks like, that, there's times of business that are good, times of business that are bad, but, we come out of it anyway, and just really building that legacy for her so that way she can, if she wants to, start a business, or maybe she doesn't want to start a business and she wants to go be a nurse, who knows, what it's going to look like in 16 years when she's, potentially going off to college. But just trying to build that legacy for her and really trying to be the inspiration. And again, obviously she has no idea what I'm doing right now. She's too young, but I hope that she could look back on it one day and see the time and effort that I put into building this business and, the opportunities that it afforded us.
What role does personal growth play in how you're building your business legacy?
It's extremely important. It's just always trying to either like listen to different podcasts or read different books or listen to different tapes. Yeah, it's been an integral part. That was really the biggest thing for me when I was first starting off was just reading books, listening to podcasts, like listening to like Entrepreneur on Fire and Lewis Howes show, and then just reading different entrepreneur books like Rich Dad Poor Dad, Napoleon Hill. I know those are the books that a lot of people recommend, but just reading those and then going on YouTube, watching the different entrepreneurial videos on there, and then even to this day, it's pretty much it's been pretty much the same over the last 10 years or so. It's listening to podcasts and it's reading books on a consistent basis and just trying to learn as much as I can.
And do you have a mentor or model whose legacy inspire yours?
That's a great question. I find, and obviously I can't live up to it, but I always just look at Steve Jobs and how he changed the world with Apple. And I read his biography and obviously listened to his speeches, and just, he was always challenging people to think differently. And I like to think of that as myself. And I don't have the expectation that I'm going to go start the next Apple or create an innovative product like that, but just how he thought differently and tried to push the boundaries. And that's really what I like to think of as myself, and, two entirely different people, but just what he was able to accomplish. And I sort of think if you look at Apple now, they really haven't created any innovative products since he, passed away so many years ago, where they came out, with the iPod and the iPhone and the iPad. And it's like, well, really, what's new? I mean, you look at the new iPhone that's coming out, in September, it's very slim. And it's like, okay, but that's not really like, it's just like not a new invention, where he was just inventing all these different things, which I thought was always very cool.
If you were to leave a note to your future grandkids about what matters most in your life, what would you say?
I would say just make sure that you spend time with family. There's always going to be business tasks that are there. There's always something new that I can be doing in the business. There's always something that I can be improving. But just knowing that, like, I'd rather do a little bit less today and spend more time with my family, and then what matters most, and not just get so caught up in always trying to grow and build my business.
If you can give one actionable step to someone listening today to start building their legacy right now, what would it be?
I think it would just be sitting down and just charting out, what are the goals you want to hit in the next 1 year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, and then just really working your way back from that. And I think that was really beneficial for me. Even now, I always check in on my goals once a week. Okay, here's, how am I progressing? How's everything going? And I find that that's been very helpful for me.
Trevor, this has been such an engaging conversation. From real estate to reputation, podcasting to personal legacy. You have really shown us what it means to build something special. Thanks for joining the show. For everyone listening, reach out to Trevor and his team, Podcasting You. And don't forget, today's sponsor is Home Club Capital, your nationwide private funding partner for your real estate investments. Visit homeclubcapital.com to learn more. Don't just listen to this episode, apply what you've heard. Whether it's guesting on your first podcast, getting serious about your investments, or simply taking your first step towards your legacy, start today. Bye-bye for now.
That's all for this episode of Amplify Your Legacy. A huge thank you for listening in today. I hope today's conversation has sparked some reflection on your own legacy. Let's keep the conversation going. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Sallana Brown, and visit sallanabrown.com for more resources on growing and preserving your legacy. Be sure to leave a rating or review. It helps others discover the show. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on future episodes packed with inspiration and actionable strategies. Until next time, keep amplifying your legacy.